She knows. What should I do? The message is sent to none other than Pastor Ezekiel. His reply comes swiftly. Keep her close. Make sure she doesn't do anything foolish. Once upon a time, in a bustling African village, there was a church that drew people from far and wide. This was no ordinary church. It was led by Pastor Ezekiel, a man revered as a vessel of God's miracles. People whispered his name in awe, claiming that with just a touch he could heal the sick, restore the broken, and change lives forever. It was a vibrant Sunday morning, and the church was alive with energy. The choir sang in perfect harmony, their voices filling the grand hall. Women in colourful dresses clapped their hands, while men in neatly pressed suits bowed their heads in fervent prayer. Children peeked curiously from behind their mothers' skirts, their eyes wide with wonder. Pastor Ezekiel stood at the pulpit, a commanding figure in his sleek black suit. His Bible gleamed under the light as he raised it high for the congregation to see. "The power of God is moving here today," his voice boomed, reverberating through the packed hall. "Come forward and receive your healing." The crowd erupted in cheers. "Hallelujah!" they shouted, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of faith and desperation. People surged forward, desperate for a touch from the man they believed was chosen by God. Among them was a frail-looking man, his clothes hanging loosely on his gaunt frame. He moved hesitantly, his legs trembling with every step. When he reached the altar, he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Pastor," the man sobbed, "please help me. I've been sick for years. The doctors have given up on me. You're my only hope." Pastor Ezekiel smiled, his face calm and reassuring. He placed a firm hand on the man's shoulder. "Today, your suffering ends," he declared, his voice thick with authority. "The light of God shall set you free." The congregation leaned forward, their breaths held in anticipation. Ezekiel raised his hand, his movement slow and deliberate, as though he were channeling divine power. With one swift motion, he placed his palm on the man's head. The man began to shake violently, his body racked with convulsions. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some turned away, unable to bear the sight. But then, as suddenly as the tremors began, they stopped. The man rose to his feet, his face glowing with an almost unnatural light. "I'm healed," he cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "Praise God, I'm healed." The crowd erupted into a frenzy. People jumped to their feet, clapping and shouting. The choir sang louder, their voices reaching a fever pitch. Women ululated, their high-pitched cries slicing through the air. But amidst the chaos, something strange happened. As Ezekiel stepped back from the man, his face flickered. For a split second, his serene expression twisted into something dark and horrifying. His eyes glowed a fiery red, and sharp curling horns emerged from his head. Sinister black wings, like those of a fallen angel, unfolded behind him, casting an ominous shadow over the altar. The transformation was so brief that it was almost imperceptible. Most of the congregation, lost in their ecstatic worship, didn't notice. But one person did. Amara, a young woman sitting near the back of the church, froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at Ezekiel. She blinked, hoping her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the image of his demonic form was burned into her mind. "No," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "That can't be real. I must be imagining things." The service continued as if nothing had happened. Ezekiel returned to the pulpit, his face calm and radiant once more. He raised his arms, calling for silence. "God's work has been done here today," he proclaimed. "Go forth and spread his glory." The congregation cheered again, their faith renewed, but Amara sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing with questions. Had she really seen what she thought she had? Or was her mind playing tricks on her? And if it was real, what did it mean? As the crowd began to disperse, Amara stayed behind, her eyes fixed on the altar. Deep down, she knew she couldn't let it go. Something about Pastor Ezekiel wasn't right, and she was determined to find out the truth. Little did she know, her search for answers would lead her down a path far darker than she could have ever imagined. Amara was the kind of person who always believed in hard work, Growing up in a humble family, she learned early on that life wasn't easy. Her parents, though poor, had done their best to raise her and her 2 younger siblings with dignity. But life dealt her a cruel hand when her parents passed away in a tragic car accident. Amara, just 19 at the time, became both a sister and a parent to her siblings, Chinedu and Adaobi. Despite her grief, Amara refused to give up. She poured herself into her studies, knowing that education was her only way out of poverty. She graduated with a degree in economics from a university not far from her village. Her family and friends celebrated her achievement, and for a brief moment, Amara allowed herself to dream. She imagined getting a good job, earning enough money to give her siblings a better life, and maybe even finding happiness for herself. After her graduation, she went for her NYSC service in a distant town. The year passed quickly, filled with hopes of building connections and landing a job afterward. But when the service ended, reality hit hard. There were no job offers, no interviews, just endless rejection letters. Amara returned to her village, disappointed but not defeated. She decided to learn tailoring, believing it would be a skill that could support her while she figured out her next steps. She spent months apprenticing, learning to sew dresses, trousers, and traditional outfits. By the time she set up her small shop, she felt a flicker of hope again. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. But tailoring didn't bring in much money. Her clients were mostly villagers who couldn't afford to pay much, and there were weeks when she didn't get any work at all. The little she earned barely covered her siblings' school fees and the household expenses. Chinedu was in his 2nd year at the university, and Adaobi was in secondary school preparing for her final exams. Both relied on Amara completely, and she felt the weight of their future resting squarely on her shoulders. Things went from bad to worse when Amara's health began to fail. It started with mild fatigue, then frequent fevers, and finally pain that left her unable to work for days at a time. She visited the local clinic, where the doctor diagnosed her with a disease that would gradually weaken her if left untreated. The treatment was expensive, far beyond what Amara could afford. As her strength deteriorated, so did her hope. She often stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how much longer she could keep going. She didn't just feel tired physically, she felt tired of life itself. She worried constantly about her siblings. What would happen to Chinedu's education if she couldn't pay his fees? Would Adaobi have to drop out of school? And what about herself? Would she be forgotten, just another face in the crowd of people life had swallowed whole? Amara hid her struggles from her siblings, putting on a brave face every day, but inside she was crumbling. That's when Chika, her best friend, stepped in with a solution that seemed almost too good to be true. It was a quiet evening, and Amara sat on a worn wooden bench outside her small home. The cool breeze did little to calm her racing thoughts. Chika arrived, carrying a basket of fruit and her ever-present smile. "Amara, you've been looking so down lately. What's going on?" Amara sighed, leaning her elbows on her knees. "I don't know, Chika. Everything feels like it's falling apart. My health, my work, my life. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." Chika set the basket down and placed a comforting hand on Amara's shoulder. "Amara, have you heard about Pastor Ezekiel? His church is changing lives. People say he performs miracles, real miracles. Maybe he can help you." Amara frowned, unsure. "A pastor? What can he do for someone like me? I don't even have enough money for offerings, let alone for treatment." Chika shook her head, smiling warmly. "It's not about money. Ezekiel's power comes from God. He's helped so many people, even those who couldn't afford it. You should come to church with me this Sunday. It might be the answer you've been looking for." And so, with little else to hope for, Amara decided to give it a chance. What did she have to lose? But she didn't know that what seemed like a blessing would soon turn into her worst nightmare. Amara's decision to visit Pastor Ezekiel's church wasn't made lightly. She spent the rest of the week mulling over Chika's words. Could it really be possible that a man like Ezekiel could help her when nothing else had? By Sunday morning, desperation had won. Dressed in her best wrapper and blouse, She made her way to the church with Chica by her side. As they approached the building, Amara was struck by its size and grandeur. Unlike the modest houses and shops in the village, Pastor Ezekiel's church stood tall and proud, its freshly painted white walls gleaming in the sunlight. The large wooden doors were open and the sound of lively singing poured out into the street. Inside, the energy was electric. The choir's voices harmonized beautifully, accompanied by drums and clapping hands. Women in colorful traditional attire danced in the aisles, and men in neatly pressed suits raised their hands to the sky. Every seat was filled, and more people stood at the back, eager to hear the pastor's sermon. "See how lively it is? I told you this place is different." Amara nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, yet there was something about it that felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the intensity of the devotion unsettled her. The choir finished their song, and the congregation erupted into cheers as Pastor Ezekiel stepped onto the pulpit. He was an imposing figure, tall and confident, dressed in an elegant black suit that seemed to shine under the lights. He raised his hand, and the crowd instantly fell silent. "Today, the power of God will move among us. Those who are sick will be healed. Those who are lost will be found. God's blessings are here. Are you ready to receive them?" "Hallelujah!" the crowd shouted in unison. Amara watched as Ezekiel scanned the room, his piercing gaze settling on each person as though he could see into their souls. His voice was magnetic, pulling the congregation into a trance-like state. Amara felt herself being drawn in too, her doubts momentarily fading. As the service continued, Amara began to notice things that didn't sit right with her. There was the woman sitting at the back, clutching her chest and staring blankly at the floor. Amara recognized her from one of Chica's stories, a woman who had been healed of a chronic illness by Ezekiel just weeks ago, but now she looked worse than ever. Amara leaned over to a nearby congregant and whispered, "That woman, wasn't she healed recently? She doesn't look well." The man stiffened, his face hardening. "You shouldn't ask questions like that. The devil tests those closest to God." Amara frowned but said nothing more. Then there were the murmured conversations she caught between services, snippets of strange rumors, whispers of people who had disappeared after receiving miracles, of families who had stopped coming to church without explanation. When Amara asked Chica about it later, Chica dismissed her concerns with a laugh. "Amara, don't let gossip distract you. People will always try to bring down what they don't understand. Pastor Ezekiel is a man of God. Focus on the blessings you came here for." Amara tried to brush it off, but the doubts lingered in the back of her mind. The most unsettling thing of all was Pastor Ezekiel himself. When he spoke, the room seemed to hold its breath. His every word was met with cheers or tears, and no one dared to interrupt him. But there was a calmness about him that felt unnatural, as though he were always in control, always watching. At one point during the service, Ezekiel's gaze fell on Amara. She froze, feeling as though he could see every fear, every doubt she carried. He smiled, and the congregation cheered as if on cue. Amara forced herself to smile back, but her hands trembled in her lap. Amara wanted to believe in Pastor Ezekiel's power, to believe that her prayers had finally been answered. But something about the church gnawed at her. The overly devoted followers, the whispered rumors, and the strange calm surrounding Ezekiel were hard to ignore. She told herself it was nothing, that she was just overthinking things, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Amara's first few visits to the church were uneventful, or so she tried to convince herself. She sat through sermons, sang with the congregation, and watched Pastor Ezekiel perform his so-called miracles. But something always seemed off, like a shadow lurking at the edge of her vision. It was a special event that Sunday, advertised as the Night of Total Freedom. The church was packed beyond capacity. People leaned against walls, sat on the floor, and even crowded outside the windows, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Pastor Ezekiel. Ezekiel called forward a woman named Mama Nkechi. Everyone knew her. She'd been unable to walk for years, relying on her children to carry her wherever she needed to go. The congregation buzzed with anticipation as Ezekiel laid his hands on her head and declared her healed. "Arise, Mama Nkechi, and walk in the light of God's power." The crowd erupted into cheers as Mama Nkechi stood up, her legs trembling. She took a few shaky steps, then burst into tears of gratitude. The church was electric with excitement, but as the days passed, Amara noticed something strange. When she saw Mama Nkechi again, the old woman was limping badly, her face vacant and pale. Amara's stomach churned. Hadn't she been completely healed just days ago? One evening, Amara approached Mama Nkechi, her voice hesitant. "Mama Nkechi, are you all right?" Amara asked. "You don't look well." Mama Nkechi glanced at Amara, her eyes wide but unfocused, as if she were looking right through her. She mumbled something incoherent and shuffled away. Amara stood frozen, her unease growing. That night, unable to shake her worry, Amara decided to stay behind after the church service. As the last congregants left and the lights dimmed, she slipped into a shadowy corner near the pulpit, hoping to find answers. She didn't have to wait long. A side door creaked open, and Pastor Ezekiel entered, followed by 3 of his closest aides. They spoke in hushed voices, their faces grave. Amara pressed herself against the wall, hidden by the thick curtains near the altar. "We must continue the sacrifices. Without them, our power will fade and this church will crumble," Pastor Ezekiel said, whispering. Amara's breath hitched. Sacrifices? Her mind raced. What could he mean? But people are starting to ask questions. What if someone finds out? What if they start digging too deep? One of the inner circle members said anxiously. Pastor Ezekiel replied, "They won't. They believe in me too much to doubt. And if anyone does," he paused, his voice lowering to a menacing tone, "we'll make sure they regret it." Amara's knees buckled, but she steadied herself, afraid of making any noise. Her hands trembled as she clutched the curtain, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. Amara's heart raced. Sacrifices. What could he possibly mean? The pastor she had trusted, the man everyone revered, was hiding something dark, something that made her question everything she thought she knew. When the men finally left, Amara slipped out of the church, her steps quick and quiet. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but it did little to calm her pounding heart. She felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. Could it be true? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Is Pastor Ezekiel evil? She didn't have answers yet, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore what she had heard. Amara couldn't keep what she had heard to herself. Her mind raced with questions, but the answers felt too heavy to carry alone. The next day, she invited her best friend Chika over to her home. They sat in the small living room, the air thick with tension as Amara hesitated to speak. "Chika, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise you won't think I'm crazy." Chika's eyebrows lifted, but her smile was warm and inviting. "Amara, you know you can tell me anything." "What's wrong?" Chika asked. Amara swallowed hard and leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last night, I overheard Pastor Ezekiel talking to his aides. He mentioned sacrifices. He said the church would crumble without them." Chika's eyes widened, but her expression remained calm. She placed a hand on Amara's knee, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Sacrifices? Are you sure you heard him correctly? Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Let's figure it out together. You're probably just overthinking it, but I'll help you look into it." For the first time that day, Amara felt a small wave of relief. She nodded, grateful for Chika's support. Later that evening, after their discussion, Chika goes home and starts texting someone. She knows. What should I do? The message is sent to none other than Pastor Ezekiel. His reply comes swiftly. Keep her close. Make sure she doesn't do anything foolish. The following night, Amara decided to act on her growing suspicions. Something inside her told her she couldn't wait any longer. Clutching a small flashlight, She made her way to the church under the cover of darkness. The building loomed large and silent, its walls glowing faintly in the moonlight. Amara hesitated at the door, her heart pounding. With a deep breath, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The emptiness of the church was overwhelming, and every creak of the wooden floorboards echoed like thunder. Amara didn't know what she was looking for, but something in her gut told her the answers lay beyond the altar. As she approached the pulpit, she noticed a small door tucked behind it. She had never seen it opened during services. Her hands shook as she reached for the handle, surprised to find it unlocked. Pushing it open, she stepped inside. The room was dark and smelled faintly of something metallic. Switching on her flashlight, she gasped. The beam of light revealed shelves lined with strange objects, candles arranged in intricate patterns, robes stained with what looked like dried blood, and a large book with symbols she didn't recognize carved into its leather cover. Amara's breath caught in her throat. On the walls, crude carvings depicted horrifying images, figures kneeling before monstrous beings with glowing eyes and sharp horns. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. Amara's worst fears were confirmed. Pastor Ezekiel wasn't a man of God. He was something far darker. Suddenly, the sound of voices echoed from the main hall. Amara's heart leapt into her throat. She quickly turned off her flashlight and ducked behind one of the shelves. "She's getting too curious. We need to keep her in line. If she finds out more," Pastor Ezekiel said. "I'll handle her. She trusts me," Chica said hesitantly. Amara's stomach churned. Chica? Her best friend? She felt a wave of nausea as the betrayal sank in. The voices grew louder, and Amara realized she had seconds to act. Clutching the flashlight, she inched toward the door. Her hands trembled as she eased it open just enough to slip out. Once outside, she broke into a sprint, not stopping until she reached the safety of her home. Amara had seen enough to confirm her worst fears. The man she thought was a savior was anything but. And her closest friend? She was part of the nightmare. Amara knew she couldn't keep quiet, but exposing the truth would come at a cost. Sunday morning came quickly, and the church was fuller than ever. The vibrant singing of the choir echoed through the air, but for Amara, the sound was hollow. She sat in the middle row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded as she tried to shake off the sense of dread that clung to her. Chica, ever supportive, sat beside her, her smile warm and reassuring. "You're not wrong, Amara. You've seen the signs. Don't let fear stop you. Just keep your phone in your lap, hit record, and let the truth come to light." Amara looked at Chica, her friend's calm demeanor seemingly genuine. With a shaky breath, she nodded and slipped her phone into her lap, pressing the record button. The service reached its peak as Pastor Ezekiel stepped forward. His voice boomed through the speakers, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Today, the Spirit has revealed a special blessing. There is someone here who has carried doubt and pain, but today, their life will change forever. Amara, come forward." The congregation turned to look at her, their eyes filled with curiosity and expectation. Amara froze in her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Chica, who gave her an encouraging nod. "This is it. Go," Chica said, whispering. Amara stood slowly, her legs trembling as she walked toward the altar. The room felt suffocating, every step heavier than the last. When she reached the pulpit, Pastor Ezekiel extended his hand with a warm smile. "Do you believe, Amara? Do you believe that God can transform your life today?" Amara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe." Ezekiel placed his hand firmly on her head, and the congregation erupted into fervent prayer. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavier, almost electric. Amara's skin prickled as she felt a strange heat radiating from his hand. But then, something happened. Ezekiel's face flickered. For a brief moment, his serene expression twisted into something horrifying. His eyes glowed a fiery red, sharp horns protruded from his head, and shadowy wings unfolded behind him. Gasps rippled through the congregation as the demonic transformation became visible to everyone. "What is that? Is this a trick?" a man from the congregation shouted. The room descended into chaos. People screamed, some scrambling for the exit, while others fell to their knees, crying out in confusion and fear. Amara stepped back, her phone still recording. Her voice shook as she yelled, "This is the truth! This is who he really is! You've all been deceived!" Before Amara could say more, Chica suddenly stood up, her face contorted with anger. She pointed at Amara, her voice loud and accusing. "She's lying," Chica shouted to Amara's surprise. "Amara manipulated that video to ruin Pastor Ezekiel and this church." The congregation turned their bewildered faces toward Amara, the chaos beginning to shift focus. "Amara, why would you do this? I only wanted to help you. How could you betray me and this congregation?" Pastor Ezekiel said calmly, playing innocent. Amara's breath caught in her throat. "What? No, I didn't." But her protests were drowned out by the angry murmurs of the congregation. "How dare you accuse a man of God? You should be ashamed." Another shouted, "You're trying to bring down this church. Get out." Tears streamed down Amara's face as the crowd began closing in, their anger palpable. She clutched her phone tightly and bolted for the exit. The shouts of the congregation echoed behind her, each word cutting deeper into her heart. Outside, the cool air hit her like a slap. She ran until her legs could carry her no more, collapsing under a large tree far from the church. Her chest heaved as she gasped for air, her mind reeling. She glanced at her phone, the screen still glowing with the recording she had made. She had the evidence, but the betrayal and humiliation left her shaken. Amara had been betrayed by the one person she thought she could trust. The truth was in her hands, but the cost of exposing it was higher than she had ever imagined. Back at her small, dimly lit room, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her body still trembling from the events at the church. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan above her. She clutched her phone tightly, afraid to look at what she had captured. Finally, she unlocked it and pressed play. The video began, showing Ezekiel's confident smile as he performed his ritual. The congregation's voices echoed in the background, their prayers loud and fervent. Then it happened, the flicker. His face twisted, horns emerged, and his wings spread wide. Amara paused the video, her heart racing. Amara had expected the truth to frighten her, but seeing it again filled her with renewed determination. She hadn't imagined it. Ezekiel's darkness was real. As she replayed the clip, something caught her eye. In the corner of the frame, Chica's expression was visible for just a moment. She wasn't shocked like the others. Her face was calm, her eyes fixed on Ezekiel as though she had expected the transformation all along. Amara's hands tightened around the phone. The betrayal was clearer than ever now. Chica hadn't just turned against her in the church. She had been part of this darkness all along. Amara felt a pang of sorrow, but pushed it aside. She couldn't let her emotions stop her. She spent the next few hours editing the video, cropping it to show Ezekiel's transformation as clearly as possible. Then she uploaded it anonymously to multiple platforms, her heart pounding as she pressed the final button. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with comments, shares, and disbelief. News outlets picked up the story, and journalists began to dig into Pastor Ezekiel's background. The once revered preacher became the subject of public outrage and investigation. Soon, law enforcement raided the church, uncovering the hidden room Amara had found and exposing evidence of Ezekiel's occult practices. Ezekiel was arrested, his reputation in tatters. Amara watched the news unfold from her small living room. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice was being served, but the betrayal still weighed heavily on her. She picked up her phone and called Chica, hoping for answers. The line rang endlessly. Chica's number was no longer in service. Amara tried visiting her home, but it was empty, abandoned as though Chica had vanished overnight. Chica's sudden disappearance left behind more questions than answers. Had she fled out of fear? Or was her role in Ezekiel's schemes even deeper than Amara had realized? The mystery lingered, haunting Amara's thoughts. Days later, Amara sat under the same tree where she had fled after the church service. The air was cool, and the village was quiet. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm. Amara had risked everything to uncover the truth, and though the journey had been painful, she had proven that light could triumph over darkness. As she stared at the horizon, she thought of her siblings, the responsibilities she still carried, and the strength she had found within herself. Even when the odds seemed against her, Amara proved that the truth has a way of coming to light. Her story became a reminder to never let fear silence you and to always seek the truth, no matter how painful it may be. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village. Amara walked along the narrow dirt path, her steps slow and deliberate. The faces she passed were no longer filled with judgment or curiosity, but with quiet respect. Children played under the shade of a large tree, their laughter ringing out like music. Market traders waved to Amara, and one old woman even offered her a small bag of oranges, a silent gesture of gratitude. Amara smiled softly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The scars of betrayal and fear were still there, but they no longer defined her. She had fought for the truth, and though the journey had been painful, it had brought her a peace she never thought she'd feel again. This story reminds us to question what we see and trust our instincts. Sometimes the people we place our faith in may not deserve it, but the strength to seek the truth, no matter the cost, can set us free. The camera pans upward, showing the vibrant colors of the village against the backdrop of the setting sun. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover life's hidden truths.